So you decide to build a retirement plan, and the question is, now what? What do you do with that information? Maybe you've put your information into an online financial planning tool like New Retirement or RICP, and the question is, what do you actually do once you do that? A lot of us are going to feel stuck at that point. And so here in this video today, we're going to be tackling Module 2 of our internal financial planning system that we call Navigating the Retirement Risk Zone. In the first module, we talked about how you find out the crux of your retirement cash flow needs that will then help you come up with the different action items you'll want to implement in your financial planning. And then in this second module here, we're going to do what's called construct the prescription. We're going to piggyback off of that first video, which, by the way, if you haven't watched already, you should take a look. It is Navigating the Retirement Risk Zone Module 1, and we talk about how you find what is called required portfolio income. In today's video, we're going to actually build a prescription in real time together on the screen so you can see how we use that information to then generate a series of financial planning recommendations that can then be acted upon. So as I said, this is module 2 of our 5-module system, and you can see that 5-module system here on the screen. We have a video we did a week or two ago that talked about all 5 modules at a very high level. It's about 7 or 8 minutes just summarizing them. And then we've been doing a weekly video where we go into more depth, 10 minutes or so into each module. So you can actually make use of these videos and build your very own retirement plan if you so choose. So without further ado, we're going to talk about how we build the system, how we build the prescription. And we use a healthcare analogy in the first module, and I'll just repeat it here. You go into the doctor and you tell them you have an ailment, and that doctor should do some kind of assessment to verify whatever is the root cause of that ailment before they give you a prescription. In the first module, we're doing that assessment. And this second module, we now will assume as we go through this together on the screen that we have diagnostic data and can use that to build a retirement plan. There's another video I've done recently called The 3 Types of Retirement Plans, and I'm going to refer to some of the topics from that video. If you want, you can go back and we'll link to the video above here. It's called The 3 Phases or The 3 Types of Retirement Plans. And we're going to start by laying the groundwork so we can understand, because basically what you need to do is use your cash flow information, your required portfolio income, to then tell you what type of retirement plan you need to build for yourself. And it's easy to think through it through these 3 stages because it gives you a heuristic through which to understand where you stand and what actions you should be considering based on where you stand. So there are 3 types of retirement plans. We would consider the most basic and the least stable plan what we call a triage plan. And this is when your retirement cash flow needs cannot be met, meaning that your portfolio cannot support the required portfolio income, which we call RPI, at the desired retirement age. And you'd have to watch module 1 to understand exactly how to calculate RPI, but the idea here is once you know your RPI or your required portfolio income, you can now backtrack what size pool of assets you need at the day you retire in order to satisfy your income needs. And then you can generate an idea of where you are, and are you in a triage plan or are you somewhere better? And if you cannot satisfy your portfolio income through the portfolio size you will have at the day you retire, then you're in a triage plan and you will consider a certain set of action items, which we will go into in just a couple minutes here in the video. The second type of retirement plan is once you pass the triage stage and move into the stabilized stage. We call this a stabilized plan. And this is when your retirement cash flow needs can be met, but you don't have any spending flexibility or not significant spending flexibility in the plan, which means that if you retired at the age you desire to retire and don't make any changes, you're going to be very spending constrained and probably on a fixed budget. And then there's a third type of retirement plan, and we call this the optimized retirement plan. And this is for those of you that have retirement cash flow needs that can be met with significant spending flexibility in retirement. And it's very easy to identify which plan you are, because once you understand required portfolio income formula, you can just quickly go into a financial planning calculator, look at the right section, understand whether your portfolio can support it. And by the way, we are not talking about using Monte Carlo here. We are talking about using real cash flow data, using your real spending information and your real portfolio construction. And I'm going to show this in a retirement plan that I'll share on the screen here in a few moments. But once you identify which type of plan you are, now we have this grid here, and you can take this grid and screenshot it or even download it. You can find it on our website as well. And there are a certain set of action items that are the most important to consider depending on which phase of retirement planning you're in. If you have a triage plan, you're going to consider 4 things: working longer, because if you work longer, you have fewer years of drain on your portfolio assets; saving more money, because if you spend less pre-retirement and accumulate more assets, you can either retire earlier or retire with more spending stability, or you can spend less in retirement, which, by the way, is the least desirable of these options. And I'm not going to go into that here, but if you want more detail about that, you can go watch the 3 types of retirement plans video because I talk about that in detail there. And to summarize here, in most cases in a triage scenario, you're going to have to do some hybrid of all 3 of these. Work longer, save more, and spend less in retirement, unless you have a lot of runway between where you are now and when you plan to retire. Then there's the second phase, and in the second phase, the stabilize phase, you're gonna be thinking through things. And by the way, when you're in the triage phase, you are not excluding what comes in stabilize and optimize. You will still do those. It just helps give you an idea of the priority of what to attend to first. Because if you're in a triage stage and you start focusing too much on your post-retirement investment strategy or your distribution strategy, and you ignore or avoid thinking through whether you need to save more or spend less or work longer, you'll be in for a hard lesson later. And so that's the way we think through this. So at Stabilize, we start to think through better Social Security claiming decisions, better pension claiming decisions, better pre-retirement and post-retirement investment strategies, and what our dynamic distribution strategy is going to be to produce income in retirement. The idea being that this set of 5 activities actually can help improve spending flexibility in retirement, which is what you're trying to do once you already know you can arrive at retirement with the right amount of assets in order to satisfy your required portfolio income. And then the third column here is optimize, and optimize are like the luxury action items. Those are things like tax planning and Roth conversions where you bring future costs to a present day because you have extra spending stability. Those are things like charitable giving or family gifting, and we could add a whole list of other things in there, but we can go through that in another video. Now that you know those action items, I'm going to give you a pro tip here, and then we're actually going to jump into a retirement plan and just talk through how you do this. The pro tip here is that we need to test one action at a time in the financial planning tool so that we can see how material the impact of that individual action item is to cash flow. Now, let me illustrate why. So I'm going to jump over to a retirement plan. It's a hypothetical test client. And let's say this client has they're like 7 or 8 years from retirement and they have a 53% probability of success. I don't really love Monte Carlo, so if we ignore Monte Carlo, what having a moderate or low Monte Carlo score tells us is that this person's cash flow is too constrained. They don't have the assets to support the cash flow they need in retirement. Now, let's say that you put 10 action items in all at once, and that's what I'm doing here when I switch to this draft plan on the left. And now you can see that their plan goes from 53% to 86%, and they have a much more sizable pool of assets, which you can see here in this column. The problem here is we don't know the material impact of each of the individual action items that are input in this plan. This adjusted plan might have 9 or 10. In fact, it does, and I know that because I built it. And so what we want to do is we actually want to start with another draft where we can take our current situation, which is the current plan on the right here, that shows 53% chance of success with whatever cash flow metrics would be included there. And we want to start to compare what's the material impact in terms of Monte Carlo, but more importantly, cash flow for each action item individually, so that we know which one is the most material and will produce the biggest impact were we to implement it. Now, for the sake of the brevity of this video, I'm not going to tab back and forth between cash flow and Monte Carlo over and over again, but what I will use is Monte Carlo as a proxy for improvements in cash flow. And that is roughly what it will mean. So what we can do here is start by making one change at a time. Let's say this couple, Steve and Amanda, want to retire at age 65 and age 61. And the first thing I might say is let's just see what the impact is if we retire 1 year later. So we move Steve to age 66 and Amanda to age 62. Let's just put that in and then hit refresh and see what happens. And you can see that has a 12% increase in Monte Carlo probability. Again, if we're just using that as a proxy for cash flow, it means that they have a significant improvement in their ability for their portfolio to support their cash flow needs. Okay, now let's backtrack that. Let's put it back to 65 and 61, and let's test against something else. So now we know that retiring later or working longer increases their probability by 12%. It's a baseline. What if we just say we want to explore whether or not they move to a more risky portfolio? We change their current asset allocation while still working, and we move them into, let's just call it a growth portfolio, and then hit refresh. What kind of impact does it have to move their investments out along the risk curve? 6%. Not super material. And you would see that if you move further and further out the risk curve, you probably have, in many cases, a less and less impactful movement of the probability, which you can see here, that actually going from growth, which would be, let's say, a 70-30 portfolio or 65-35 to a 75-25, which is the aggressive portfolio, actually has no material impact. So you get no more benefit from moving out along the risk curve of investments, which just tells us that that action item has a very limited impact. And if we go back to our presentation here and we look at our kind of prescriptions, we can see that that's one of the reasons that retirement investments is actually in the stabilized phase, because it's kind of more of a luxury action item. It doesn't actually move the needle that much unless you're sitting in extremely hyper-conservative portfolio that's maybe all cash or very close to all cash. Then it will have a material effect. But if you're moving from 55% stock and 45% bond to 65-35, you're not going to have a huge material impact in probability. Let's do the same thing for one more action item here, just so you can see. What if we go in and we want to see if they just cut pre-retirement spending, which means save more money pre-retirement, and we go and change their pre-retirement living expenses from roughly $37.50 a month to $3,000 a month? What kind of impact will that have on their probability? Again, in cash flow, 6%. Okay, so to summarize this, you would want to go through this for each possible action item that we have on our list here to see what is the material impact. And you will find that certain things have a much more material impact than others. And this allows you to identify what you should attack and target first from an execution standpoint. Now, the most important part of this presentation is these last two parting thoughts. So to round out this presentation, we just want to repeat how important it is to test one action at a time to identify the materiality or the impact of that one action item so that you can understand what to attack first as you build. Now, we're going to leave you with two very, very important parting thoughts. The first of those is that the best plan is the one that you can execute and know with certainty you can execute. The best plan from the mathematics standpoint and from the probability standpoint is not the best plan if it requires so much trade-off and sacrifice that you actually cannot execute on it. That's just setting yourself up to fail, and it will give you false hope. The second point here piggybacks off that first, which is that it doesn't matter what the financial plan says. Doesn't matter if the Monte Carlo says something nice when you put on all these action items. It doesn't matter if the cash flow says something nice. It matters how well you execute. And this is where a lot of people get in trouble. If you build a nice model plan in Right Capital or any financial planning tool, and it shows you a huge, tremendous increase in probability of success, and then you start living as though you will have that level of success, but you don't execute on the underlying requirements or action items that generate this greater probability or this better cash flow, you will be in for an extremely rude awakening at the point at which you retire. So that all said, it's very, very critical to remember these two thoughts. So the best way to do this is to build a plan that you know you can execute and then slowly layer on more action items over time as you get more skilled and as you build discipline and as you build confidence in your ability to execute. In next week's video, we're going to go into module 3, which we call implementing this prescription. And this is how we actually take these prescription action items or recommendations, working longer, saving more, changing asset allocations, changing Social Security claiming age, knowing what to do with a pension, understanding whether you're going to use a floor and ceiling or a guardrail distribution or spending strategy. It's great to have all that information, but now you need to have a plan for how you're going to implement that and execute, like we said in that last point. And that is next week's video, module 3, implementing the prescription. So we hope you'll stay tuned and pay attention and watch that video. As I've said in the prior videos, these videos are a part of a free email sequence that we will be offering to anybody who subscribes to our email list. They'll also be available for free on YouTube, but you'll be getting a whole bunch of other resources, including free access to our financial planning tool, as well as the underlying spreadsheets and models that we are reviewing in the videos along with these modules. So if you're not already in the email queue, go to our website. You can sign up for that email list anywhere on our website. And as always, you can schedule a free consultation with our fee-only fiduciary financial planning team if you'd like. Otherwise, stay tuned, look at your inbox, enjoy these videos. And as always, thank you for your time and attention, and see you in the next video.